She said it while brushing her fingers down the center of my chest, as if the softness of the moment would blur the sharpness of her words. "You are always too much," she whispered. She did not say it with frustration. She said it with the tone of someone diagnosing a flaw she had grown tired of pretending was charming. Her hand lingered, but her eyes had already moved beyond me, toward something simpler, easier, less vivid. I did not flinch. I let her feel the silence between us stretch and cool like poured concrete. There was nothing in my expression she could hold onto. That was the beginning. She rolled onto her side, her back to me, and pulled the blanket up to her neck. Her breath settled quickly, practiced. I watched the line of her shoulder motionless under the sheets, not a shiver, not a single delayed breath, just closure, clean and undisturbed. I got up without sound, moved through the hallway slowly with the precision of someone not trying to hide, but not trying to be seen either. In the kitchen, I poured water into a glass, drank half, then stood still in the dark. There was no rage, only recognition. That sentence, "You are always too much," was not born tonight. It had been rehearsed, edited, focus grouped in her mind until she had found the exact moment it would land without consequences. She believed I would let it settle. She believed she could write that line into the foundation of whatever came next and that I would nod and internalize it. She was wrong. The next morning she behaved like someone who had already resolved everything inside herself. She wore a fitted blazer she had not touched in months. The color was deliberate, cool, sharp, untouchable. She ate standing up, one hand on her phone, the other lifting slow forkfuls of soft fruit. Her tone was pleasant, her updates measured. "There is a gallery preview tonight," she said without looking up. "Maya invited me, you know how she is about attendance." I finished my coffee before answering. Should I plan on joining? She did not hesitate. "No need, it is more her circle than ours." Her circle, ours. The phrasing had shifted. I marked it down mentally, not because I needed it as proof, but because pattern is always built on repeated misalignment. She left with a brisk kiss on my cheek and a reminder to water the orchid in the den. After she was gone, I checked the mail, physical, not digital. An invitation had arrived from the Remark Collective, a mid-tier art incubator with reach into several investment circles. The name on the embossed envelope was hers alone. Inside was a program pamphlet. She was listed as a featured speaker on the opening night panel. The session title read, "Creative Autonomy and the Myth of Shared Vision." No mention of our firm, no mention of me. I reread it twice, folded it, set it next to the orchid she had told me to water. That evening I dressed plainly and drove to the gallery without mentioning it to her. I did not plan to confront. I planned to watch. The space was minimal, intentionally sparse. White walls, spotlights, background jazz curated to feel cultured but casual. She stood near the panel table, speaking to a man I recognized, a branding executive who had once pitched me a project I had declined. He laughed easily, placed his hand briefly on her back as he leaned in to speak. She nodded with poise, not warmth. When she took the stage, she thanked the host and began her prepared remarks. Her voice was calm, polished, imbued with exactly the kind of performative humility people mistake for insight. She spoke of creative clarity, of realigning direction, and stepping away from outdated frameworks of shared leadership. She never used my name, but every line pointed toward me. I stayed long enough to see her take a question about her transition into solo creative leadership. She answered with a modest smile and said, "Some people are built for synergy, others need to claim their own air." The applause was quiet but approving. I left before she saw me. At home, I set the pamphlet beside the stack of legal documents I had quietly begun gathering over the past month: ownership filings, email authorship timestamps, internal creative records, all bearing my name. Nothing was missing yet, but something was being unhooked. The next morning she returned to form. Eggs, toast, soft music. She asked if I had slept well. I said yes. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "I have missed this calm," she said. "You seem more balanced lately." I nodded. "That is good to hear." She smiled like someone pleased with the results of her experiment. She had thrown a statement into the dark and now believed the quiet meant acceptance. But my silence was not surrender. It was observation, and she had no idea how closely I was listening. I began cataloging the edits, not to her words, to her presence. She had always been meticulous, but now her exactness had taken on a performance quality. She changed her screen background to a branded slogan I had never seen, minimal font, washed color tones. It read, "Vision is ownership." The kind of line that seems insightful until you ask who wrote it. The next day I asked her directly, lightly, where the quote came from. Her answer was seamless. "A draft concept for a future project. I am still shaping it." Still shaping it. I nodded. Later, I found the exact line on a press release for a boutique agency listed under her name as strategic founder. The agency site was newly launched. No contact number, just mood boards, testimonials from names I did not recognize, and a founder's note that referred to breaking from inherited constraints. The tone was unmistakably hers. The language had my fingerprints, but not my name. That evening, I watched her scroll her phone while we sat across from one another in the den. Serene. A blanket folded across her legs, jazz playing again, same playlist from the gallery event. She looked up and caught my eye. "What is it?" she asked, soft and smiling. I kept my voice even, "Just thinking." She tilted her head. "You always do that, drift somewhere." I returned her smile. "Maybe I am trying not to be too much." She paused, lips parting slightly. A flicker of recognition passed over her face, then it was gone. She laughed lightly. "I did not mean it like that." I nodded. "Of course not." That was the end of it on the surface. The next morning I sent a message to a silent partner we had shared across 3 projects, someone she had always assumed was aligned more with her. I asked for a quick call. I said nothing about what it was regarding. He answered with quiet hesitation, then said, "I have been meaning to check in with you. Elise mentioned you might be stepping back from active leadership." I asked how she had phrased it. His voice tightened. "That you were recalibrating, that you needed time for clarity." I let the silence stretch. He added, "Is that not accurate?" "No," I said, "it is not." He hesitated. "Then I think we should talk properly." I scheduled the meeting for 3 days later, in person. That night she brought home Thai food, my favorite order from the place we had not used in months. She poured wine, asked if I had any new thoughts on the investor packet. I nodded and said I would loop her in soon. She smiled, pleased. She believed she was managing the drift, that I was pacified, that the recalibration she had narrated into existence was now bearing fruit. I thanked her for the food, told her it was thoughtful. She touched her glass to mine gently. "You have been easier to be around lately." I watched her drink, watched her shoulders relax into the moment. She thought I was softening. I was sharpening. The following day I began building a map not of her actions but of her edits. Old posts where she had reshared my words now credited to M's strategy. Visual decks we had collaborated on now filed with her maiden signature. I downloaded each one, time-stamped them, created a folder titled Reverse Architecture. By the end of the week, I had traced the LLC registration of her new agency to a shared workspace downtown. She had named the business after her grandmother, an identity marker I had heard her use only once, years ago, during a conversation about legacy. She had used that legacy to create a foundation that excluded me entirely. I booked a tour of the shared workspace under a neutral alias. The coordinator greeted me warmly, mentioned they had a few branding collectives working here. One of them had a beautiful studio in the back, run by a visionary with a clear message about solo ownership. I asked if the founder was ever on site. "Oh yes," the coordinator said brightly. "She is usually in by 10. Elise Monroe, I believe. She runs M Studio." Monroe, her pre-marriage name. Not once had she told me she was using it professionally again. I smiled, thanked the coordinator, left before the hour ended. At home that night she suggested a weekend away, just the 2 of us. "We could reset," she said. "Get some distance from all the noise." I asked what noise she meant. She waved a hand vaguely. "The tension, the press, the identity shuffle." She used the word identity so easily now, like it was a wardrobe item to change out on a whim. I told her I would think about it. The following morning she left for a content alignment session. Her words, "I opened her office drawer, not to invade, but to confirm." Inside was a copy of a brand deck we had developed together 2 years ago. My original design, my language. Her annotations had removed my attribution line and replaced it with a single note scrawled in the margin. "Shift voice. Remove legacy imprint." I scanned it, saved it. filed it next to the gallery pamphlet and the LLC registration. She was not just trying to step away. She was trying to erase me, efficiently, softly, with curated grace. But she had forgotten the one thing I never stopped doing. I remembered everything. The first time I saw my father's middle name in the filings, I assumed it was a coincidence. Then I looked again. It was embedded inside a holding company tied to M Studio, registered in a state we had never lived in, through a law firm known for confidential structuring arrangements. The company had been formed 4 months ago, listed under a legacy transfer clause. The documents described it as part of a family-aligned creative trust, the family being mine, the alignment being hers. I called my attorney, not our shared one, mine, the one who had handled my father's estate. I asked him to review the entity under that name. He returned the call that evening. His voice was steady. That name was never part of your father's filings. The claim is fictional. I did not answer immediately. He added, but it looks like someone used archived templates from your original estate planning software. The language matches your father's documents from 2019. I thanked him and hung up. She had used my father's name as a decoy, a way to backdate a connection that never existed. She was not just reframing the present, she was repurposing the past. That night she walked into the living room with 2 glasses of wine and a new playlist. Not jazz, something ambient, warmer. She sat beside me, folded one leg under herself, and leaned slightly against my shoulder. I had a breakthrough today, she said, her voice soft, as if we were in the middle of a story she believed we both understood. I looked at her. What kind? She smiled. About how I want to be seen, not just professionally, personally, as someone who moved with grace, who chose alignment over reaction. She used the word grace like it was a signature. I nodded once. That is a powerful story, she laughed gently. It is not a story, it is who I am becoming. I met her gaze. That is what makes it believable. She blinked, then smiled again, but something shifted behind her eyes, not fear, not guilt, just the faint awareness that her narrative was no longer as opaque as she had assumed. She leaned back into me. I feel like you are seeing me more clearly now. I kept my arm still. I am. She closed her eyes, satisfied. The following morning, I submitted a formal request through a third-party firm to halt the use of disputed materials, requesting the withdrawal of any brand materials using my father's name in connection with creative assets. I sent a duplicate letter to her new agency's registered address, formal, direct, emotionless. That evening, she said nothing about it. Instead, she cooked dinner. Roasted vegetables, quinoa, grilled fish. The kind of meal we used to have when we were building something together. I want to do a small dinner next month, she said as she cleaned up. Just a few people from the studio. You could come or not, whatever feels right. I studied her back as she wiped the counter. Her movements were calm, rehearsed, not performative, calculated. I said nothing, because that dinner would not happen. The panel event was scheduled for the following week, a major creative summit where she would deliver her keynote, reintroducing herself as the visionary behind a firm that had never existed without my structure. I had made one quiet call to the event's coordinator, sent them scanned documents showing brand authorship, original copyright stamps, the origin of the M acronym. I told them I would not cause a disruption. I simply asked that the panel description reflect factual accuracy. They agreed. On the morning of her keynote, she left early, wore a black blazer, muted gold jewelry, a notebook tucked neatly under her arm. She kissed my cheek, her voice light. Wish me luck, I said, always. She smiled and walked out the door. I arrived at the summit 20 minutes before her session, took a seat at the back. No badge, no announcement. She stepped onto the stage with the polish of someone who had trained for it. The opening applause was generous. She greeted the room with poise. Today I want to share how clarity can emerge from imbalance, how separation can spark innovation. The screen behind her lit up with her studio's logo, M Studio, but beneath it a new line had been added by the event organizers. M Studio originated in partnership with AR Division, co-led by Adam Raines, 2014-2021. She paused mid-sentence, not visibly, but I knew the signs, the breath she cut short, the flicker in her eyes. She recovered quickly, smiled. Continued, but the narrative had cracked. After her session, several attendees approached her with compliments. She smiled, accepted them, but her eyes scanned the room. She was looking for me. I had already left. At home that evening she was quiet. She poured a glass of wine but drank none of it. She sat on the edge of the couch, legs crossed, hand resting on the stem of her glass like she might speak, but she did not. I asked how the event went. She said, "Fine." I nodded. It must have felt good. Being seen. She did not answer. I stood and walked to the kitchen, poured myself water. The silence remained unbroken. She had believed she was constructing a new foundation. What she had not realized was that I had been patiently removing each brick of fiction she laid down. She still believed she could reframe the story. But stories collapse when they meet records, and I had kept them all. 3 days after the summit, the first email landed in my inbox. It came from a known investor, one we had both pitched years ago. The subject line was short. "Need clarity." The body was even shorter. "Conflicting ownership paths. Can we speak?" He had attached a PDF. I opened it slowly, already knowing what I would find. It was a prospectus issued by her studio, dated 2 months prior. It described the firm's founding principles, key contributors, asset lineage, and brand origin story. My name did not appear once. Not even in the legacy section. What did appear was a diagram, one she had used before in our pitches. The structure was nearly identical, except that it now credited her alone for its development. The core innovation she had lifted from our old strategic model was labeled M-Core Matrix. I remembered the night I first drew that diagram, on the back of a coffee receipt at a midtown diner while she scribbled adjectives beside it. She had called it two-layered. I had called it the foundation. Now she called it hers. I replied to the investor within the hour, scheduled a private call, sent a follow-up with documentation, copyright filings, timestamped drafts, internal version logs. He did not respond with outrage, only acknowledgement. That was enough. That evening she asked if I wanted to join her for a quiet dinner outside the city. "There is a place Maya recommended," she said while folding a linen blouse into a weekend bag. "They do seasonal courses, very restorative." I asked how long we would be gone. "Just overnight, maybe one extra day if we feel like it." Her voice was calm, light, designed for healing. I told her I would think about it. The next morning I received confirmation from the summit director. A quiet note: "We are updating the panel archives to reflect joint origin credit. Your files were helpful, thank you." I read it twice, then archived the thread. That afternoon she messaged me from her office. "I think we need to create more space for both of us. It does not have to be drastic, just intentional." I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "What would that look like?" she answered 3 minutes later. "You focus on your work, I focus on mine. We do not step on each other's narratives. Narratives, not relationship, not connection. Narratives." That evening I asked if she had sent any updated documents to the trademark office. Her face remained still. "Why do you ask?" "Because we received a formal notice requesting the withdrawal of certain content from a boutique firm with a similar name." She blinked, then gave a slow nod. "That was a misunderstanding. I handled it. I let that settle." "You used my father's name in your filings," I said after a pause. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "It was symbolic, not legal. A reference." "That reference was filed through a firm specializing in protective misdirection." She said nothing. I stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out a slim folder, handed it to her. Inside were screenshots of the registration documents, the legacy transfer clause she had drafted, the matching phrasing from my father's estate files. She flipped through them slowly, then closed the folder. "I thought you were too tired to notice." I said nothing. She looked up, her face a mask of calm. "You are always too much. That was never the problem. The problem was that I thought I could shape that into something less." I stepped back, arms crossed, "And instead you tried to erase it." She stood, placed the folder on the coffee table, and walked toward the kitchen. As she poured water into a glass, she spoke without turning. "Do you want to fight, or do you want to finish this with some grace?" I watched her for a long moment. Her back was straight, her hands steady. "I want the record to be correct," I said. She turned then, her eyes clear. "Then it already is. You kept everything." She was not apologizing. She was conceding, but only because she had no more moves left. That night I opened the folder labeled Legacy Retained and added the final entry, her admission, even unspoken, that the truth could no longer be revised. She had spent a year sculpting her exit, curating a new version of herself built on omissions and selective edits. She had called me too much. But it was not intensity she could not live with. It was memory, and I had remembered everything. She did not bring up the folder again. Not the next morning, not the one after. Instead, she resumed a careful performance of routine. She made coffee before I woke. She organized the mail into clean piles. She texted me mid-afternoon updates about groceries, errands, articles she thought I might find interesting. None of it was real. She was stalling. She had hoped I would burn the evidence or bury it under civility, that I would file it away as closure. Instead, I made 2 quiet calls. One to the summit's legal counsel, requesting a formal addendum to the post-event archive. The second to a boutique firm specializing in digital provenance, experts at authenticating creative origin in legacy disputes. I forwarded them every document, emails, whiteboard photos, old voice memos from project briefings where I had outlined the strategy she now called her foundation. That evening, she suggested we eat on the porch. "It is warm enough," she said, lighting the candles I had not seen her touch in months. She made couscous with roasted vegetables, added a sprig of rosemary to each plate. She poured wine but drank slowly, watching me carefully. "You seem distant lately," she said. I matched her tone. "Do I?" She tilted her head. "It is not a criticism, just a shift." I let the sentence hang. She added, "I still think there is a version of us that works." I looked across the table. "What version is that?" Her smile was faint. "The one where we support each other's growth." I nodded. "I support the truth." That broke the rhythm. She blinked, took a breath, then changed the subject. We ate in silence. The next morning, a message landed from the digital provenance firm. One sentence, confirmed. "Authorship matches your record exactly." I printed the report, sealed it, and placed it in the safe I kept behind the bookshelves in my office. Not because I planned to use it immediately, because she had proven that memory alone was not enough. At noon, she sent a calendar invite for a dinner, neutral location, quiet, minimal. "Just us," the note read. "No performance." I accepted. When I arrived, she was already seated, a single menu opened in front of her, wine untouched. Her smile was careful. "I wanted a pause," she said when I sat down, "before we cross into something irreversible." I folded my napkin calmly. "We already have." She nodded slowly. "But maybe we could shape the ending." "You shaped it when you erased the beginning," I said. She looked down at her hands. "It was never erasure, it was reclamation." That was her defense, not innocence. Reframing. I studied her posture. The quiet confidence of someone who believed legacy could be rewritten with enough polish, enough distance, enough new witnesses. I let the silence stretch long enough to make her shift slightly in her chair. Then I said, "You submitted documents tying my father's name to your LLC." She looked up quickly. "It was symbolic. It was strategic." Her jaw tight. "You were never supposed to notice." I noticed everything. The server approached, but she waved him off. Her voice softened. "You could dismantle everything I have built." "I will not have to," she blinked. "What does that mean?" "It is already unraveling." I stood before she could answer, left a crisp bill on the table, walked out. By the time I returned home, I had received a voicemail from one of her former collaborators. The tone was clipped. "I saw the updated filings. You might want to know she used internal drafts from your 2017 portfolio without proper attribution during her brand presentation." The message ended there. She was not just rebranding. She was overstepping boundaries deliberately. I downloaded the voicemail, saved it under the tag Witness A, then I sat in the dark and stared at the wall. Not because I was tired, because the performance was over, and the real reckoning had begun. The following day, M Studio became the subject of formal scrutiny. The agency that had once been her new identity now faced scrutiny from 2 investors and 1 private board member, not because I had filed a complaint, because the evidence I assembled had begun to circulate through the very networks she believed she controlled. She asked nothing about it. At home, she moved with even greater calm. She asked if I needed anything from the store. She cleaned the guest bathroom. She restocked the wine cabinet with bottles I used to favor. There was no breakdown, only a change in rhythm, as if control could still be recaptured through civility. That night she found me in the den. She stood quietly for a moment, then stepped closer. "I know about the letters," she said. Her voice was low, not angry, measured. I kept my hands still. "Which letters?" She exhaled slowly. "The ones to the board." The timestamps were too aligned to be a coincidence. I watched her. I did not write them. Her brow lifted. But you prepared them. I did not answer. She sat on the edge of the armrest across from me. Her eyes were calm, but her fingers tapped lightly against her thigh. You win then, she said. Congratulations. This was never about winning, I replied. Her smile was tight. No, it was about being right, which I suppose is worse. I leaned forward slightly. It was about memory. About refusing to be edited out of the truth. She said nothing. For a moment I saw the version of her I used to believe in. The woman who once said legacy was built on shared language, who had co-signed every vision I sketched late into the night. But that version had been retired long before this moment. She stood and walked to the hallway. I am going to Portland, she said over her shoulder. I need space. A week. I asked nothing, offered nothing. When she left the next morning, she carried one bag. No goodbye. I watched from the window as the car pulled away. She did not look back. At noon, I received an encrypted file from the summit's legal division. It included a copy of her original keynote draft, with metadata showing she had uploaded materials built from my protected files. The submission had been quietly flagged. She had misrepresented ownership. I forwarded the package to my counsel, then archived it under a folder titled Final Build. That evening, I walked through the house. Not to reflect, to reset. I boxed the prints she had chosen, took down the studio mock-ups she had mounted. I left the space bare, white-walled, precise. By morning, I had received 3 emails from former clients. Each one offered quiet support. One of them had been approached by her team weeks earlier, offered a transition package in case the partnership dissolved. None of them had accepted. She had tried to replace me in every way that did not require naming me. Now the silence was naming her, and there was nothing she could hold on to. She returned 5 days later. No warning. Just the low hum of a ride-share pulling into the driveway, the sound of a door closing with forced quiet. I did not get up. I did not greet her. She entered the house as if it still belonged equally to her. She carried no luggage, just a slim leather folio under her arm and a practiced stillness that was meant to imply reflection. I remained seated in the den. She walked in, paused at the threshold, and scanned the room. The prints were gone. The mounted mock-ups had been replaced with blank frames. The space was no longer curated to her design. She looked at me, then glanced at the shelf behind me. You changed everything. I said nothing. She stepped further in. I spoke to Harper this morning, she said. She told me the board will be issuing a statement. I nodded. They will, her lips pressed together. You had every right. I know. She sat down slowly on the opposite chair, not the one she always used, a different one slightly out of view, slightly lower. It was not submission, it was calculation. I want to propose something, she said. I waited. She opened the folio and removed a sheet of paper. An agreement, a clean severing of business ties. You retain full ownership of AR division. I withdraw all claims. We issue a joint public message, amicable, civil. I looked at the paper but did not touch it. Why now? I asked. Her eyes flicked upward. Because I know where this is heading, and because I would rather lose cleanly than be exposed slowly. There was no apology, no recognition of the damage done, only strategy. You do not get to narrate the ending, I said. She leaned back slightly. You have made your point. I underestimated how much you kept, how clearly you saw me. I always saw you, I said. You just thought that meant I would never act. She looked away. For the first time, I saw something close to weight in her expression. Not grief, not regret, just consequence. She stood slowly. I will leave the agreement. If you want it, you can use it. If not, I will respond to whatever comes next. I said nothing. She walked out with the same calm she had used to dismantle our foundation, as if nothing could stick to her. As if identity was still a changeable fabric, but it was not. Not anymore. The fallout began quietly. A former collaborator issued a retraction. An investor released a brief statement naming the true origin of the brand structure. Her panel talk was pulled from the summit's website, archived but no longer promoted. The client stopped calling. By the 3rd week, her studio's site was offline. Her agency's social channels had been wiped. She did not reach out, not with apologies, not with accusations. Only once near the end of the month did I receive a message, short, cold, precise. You could have just let me walk away. I did not respond because I had. She just did not realize that walking away without accountability was never an option. I kept the business. I restored the credits. I rebuilt the narrative not out of revenge but out of memory. Because memory, unlike performance, does not need applause. It only needs truth. And I gave her nothing she could hold on to.